the majority of people believe that it's a gendered issue. It's men attacking women, and women are the predominant victims of DA. Now, you provided a bit of a counter narrative to that, and you also mentioned that men can make up as much as 40% of being victims in DA relationships in society. Firstly, have you had any backflack from that statistic or from that?
Yeah. A few days ago, I got told to myself. Someone said that to me, and then same day, someone's like, "You need to delete your account, otherwise, I'm going to take legal action. We've reported all of your posts."
What are you saying? What's illegal?
I was like, "Well, on what grounds?"
Yeah.
And then they were like, "You're creating falsehoods." I'm like, "Give me one example." They can't, and then I'm like, it's just a waste of my time. But yeah, I mean, I don't want to get the violin out for myself because I get way more messages of support from people such as your friend, which I really appreciate, and they stick with me a lot more than these stupid self DMs I get, which are obviously not great, but really don't bother me too much. There is backlash, not necessarily to me, but people who are in the field of family violence research that present findings as you've described them, not more than 40%, 50%, some studies, right. Half. And the researchers who have presented that data, despite them presenting solid evidence and despite them being really highly respected academics who are the very best in the field, they'll get actual death threats. So the Murray Strausses, the Susan Steinmetz, the Erin Pizzey, Richard Yellis, Murray Strauss, like all these different people, they've had horrendous experiences. They've had people accusing them of being paedophiles. They've had people sending bomb threats to their daughter's wedding. They've had people calling, like threatening their life. It's very common. But I that was, in the 80s and 90s. I feel like it's not quite as bad now, but you still get a few silly people messaging you. But the 40%, that's specifically UK data, well, 39% if we're going to be exact, and that's the new upcoming ONS data. They've basically changed the way they're going to measure domestic abuse to make it in line with the new domestic abuse bill, and a lot of that is because women in the women's sector wanted to increase the number of women in that data to show there's how many women there are, and it did increase. I think it increased by about 50%, but the male victimhood increased by even more. It doubled. Right. So the male victimhood went up to 2.5 million, and I think women's is about 3.5 million every year in England and Wales, domestic abuse, that is. So yeah, about 40%. And then in America, if you look at the CDC National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey, which is again a big government federal survey, huge sample every time it comes out. I think there's about 5 different surveys every single time. Is 50-50 more or less. I mean, give or take 5% either way. Sometimes more men, sometimes more women, but 50-50. So no one likes to hear about it, but the data is impossible to ignore.
Hi everyone, this video is sponsored by my best-selling police memoir, The Jobs Fuck Secret Diary of a Police Officer. If you want to find out the things that really happen in the police, the good, the bad and the ugly, the things what the police really don't want people to know, then check this book out. The book is available on Kindle, paperback and audio, and you can get it from the link in the description of this video. Be sure to like and subscribe and show some support to the channel. You can also sign up to my newsletter to receive news and updates, and you can even support me on Patreon for as little as a price of coffee a month. I'm a one-man army doing this, so your support means the absolute world. So please sit back, relax and enjoy the video. Because there's always the emphasis on violence against women and girls, which obviously is an issue we need to talk about. And I've spoken to people from the Women's Safety Initiative who raise this as a serious issue. But you never get anyone violence against men and boys. And of course, we know when it comes to sexual violence for children, when it comes to violence against men in domestic abuse relationships, financial abuse, or even abuse when it comes to they've separated and then they are then using the courts as a weapon, the family courts against the men, which I know personally people who that's happened to. So
your friend being parental alienation, of course, is
absolutely
horrific.
So with that, George, why do you think there's such a, if it's not a gendered issue, as your research is showing, and it is more even, granted we might be weighted a little bit more one way than the other, but not the not the 1 in 11 men and 1 in 4 women, which we've all been led to believe. It's actually much more succinct. Why do you think there's this pushback when somebody does raise and say, actually, it is a problem which affects both?
It's embarrassing, isn't it? It's embarrassing to be wrong, especially about something that you've badged yourself with so passionately. Like, you've done everything. You've built your set of political beliefs around violence against women into every facet of your life, like everything from your friendship groups to your job to your social media identity. You've even got the T-shirt. But when that turns out to be wrong or not the complete truth, it's embarrassing. The climb down is absolutely enormous. Like, if you actually just think about it, for someone to spend their whole life saying the vast majority of victims of domestic abuse are women, and then to be presented with shocking data that says no, women are just as violent as men in relationships, I think that's such a massive climb down from this drum they've been banging really loud for their entire lives, and it's like embarrassing. And people's fundamental identity are tied up with their political beliefs to the point that they identify as these things. They identify as a feminist. And when that's shown to be not the complete truth in the way that data I've described to you presents it as, it's embarrassing. It's like having food between your teeth all day and everyone's seen it and it's embarrassing. But then the solution isn't to go back out the next day. The solution is to fix the problem and like change your mind. Like I've been through that journey. I was one of the people that insisted the vast majority of abuse victims are women. And I remember the moment I found out it was 1 in 3 are men, and since gone up to 40%, but at that point it was 1 in 3. And I was just like so embarrassed and shocked. But I responded with wanting to help other people realize the ugly truth, the full picture. And not everyone wants to see it, unfortunately.
I like what you said there, where you have been on the other side and you have been in the other camp, and when you presented with evidence which was contrary to belief, you did quite a mature thing, and you said, you know what, maybe I was wrong about this. Now let's look into this further. I think if more people from either side of the political spectrum, wherever you may sit, are more open to looking at the evidence and looking at what the evidence is showing us, we can all form much more rounded ideas.
Even if not, though, even if you're going to insist it's a gendered model, you have to contend with two things there. First of all, you have to decide at what point is something gendered. Is it 51%? Is it 60%, 70%, 90%? When is it gendered? You have to decide where is that line. And gendered to the point where we're not going to even talk about that 10% or 20%, 30% of men. And the second thing you have to then contend with is, are you going to apply that the other way? So if nearly 9 in 10 homeless deaths in the UK are men, is that gendered? Are we going to just completely ignore homeless women? What about male suicide? If 3/4 of that is men, then are we going to ignore suicide? Obviously not. And I don't think we should. I don't think we should be gendering anything. I think we should be looking at social issues as a whole. And yeah, those are two things that I never hear discussed. At what point is a minority sufficiently small enough that it becomes gendered and we can ignore them? And does that apply both ways?
I think when it comes to when you say that it's a gendered issue, you then can become politically charged, can't it? In that you go, okay, well, now it's a gendered issue. Well, I identify as a feminist, therefore this is an issue I have to really care about. But it, rather than being able to do that, and you stick to, okay, well, take emotion out of it. What are the facts? What are we seeing? Like you said, 90% of people who are homeless are men. 3/4 of suicides are men. That's not to say you ignore the other proportion of that issue, but you're saying that, well, let's take the gender out of it and let's look at the problem and try and find the solution without inferring our own biases to it as well. I remember speaking to somebody about the disparity of the domestic violence issue when it comes to the statistics of men and women. And I believe their response was, well, that might be true, but more women die as a result. Do you think why it's so heavily weighted then is because of the level of violence which a man could carry out towards a woman rather than a woman?
Yeah, I mean, just to rewind to the point of homeless people, it's 90% of homeless deaths, not homeless
Oh, my
people.
apologies.
I mean, it's like 75, 80% of homeless people, but the vast majority of deaths are men. Answering a question of, yeah, people say more women are killed by their male partners and female women are killed and men are killed by their female partners. And that is true. But there's certain things you need to understand about that is that partner homicide, thankfully, is like, 0.001% of all domestic abuse. That is obviously the most violent, tragic instances of domestic violence are homicides. And although it's disproportionately women being killed, I think it's about 3/4. It's not 100%. It's still one in four is a man. It is mostly women, but that is again, that's a small. You're painting. That's the man and the bear in the forest. That you're presenting quite an outrageous, narrow barometer of domestic abuse that thankfully doesn't meet the general view of domestic abuse where partners are not killed. So you're positioning in a way where it's at the very extreme. Second, I would say that it is true, but then if you look at things like suicides as a result of abuse, so men who take their lives as a result of being abused by any family member, those are mostly men. And if you add those to the equation and just look at all deaths as a result of domestic abuse, some data finds that there are more men that die as a result of abuse if you include suicides.
So when you look at, say, a hidden homicide, where somebody cannot find a way out, and as a result of what's happening to them, they end their lives.
Think about a man like having his child taken away, the other partner is alienating that child against him through lies and coercion, and then maybe there's some elements of physical and psychological abuse. I mean, there's so many men and women that end their lives as a result of that, and they're not included in that shocking stat of homicides. But those deaths are a result of domestic abuse. That is not directly in the same way homicide is. So yeah, and also there's another trick. People talk about intimate partner homicide and domestic homicide. Intimate partner homicide is a partner killing another partner, former partner, or current partner. That is quite overwhelmingly women. It's about 3/4. But if you look at domestic homicide, which is any family member killing another family member, that is a lot closer to 50-50 because there's a huge overrepresentation of boys being killed by parents. So those are not obviously talked about in intimate partner homicide stats. But if you look at domestic homicide as a whole, you're coming a lot closer to 50-50, maybe 60-40. It's not as extreme as intimate partner homicide. So there's lots of different caveats that are important. But again, I would say any act of abuse is worth talking about because they don't just, it's not day one intimate partner homicide. That's normally an escalation of many months or years of abuse. So those seemingly unimportant, benign acts of abuse that make up the 2.5 million men, 3.5 million women, they can and do escalate. So it's important to talk about them now before they become more extreme.
Yeah, 100% agree with you. Like I've done a lot of research and a lot of when I was in the police, I worked with domestic incidents quite a lot, which brings me on to the next topic. Really, when it comes to, so the police would be called to an address, there'd be an argument. It could easily be the man or the woman that started it. For example, nobody has put hands on each other. It's just an argument. But due to statistic-driven policing, somebody needs to be arrested for whatever reason. Overwhelmingly, it's the man who's arrested. And there's even cases where I've dealt with where a man is the one covered in blood, he's rang the police, he's clearly the victim, but due to a counter allegation, he's then arrested. So do you think that there's sexism in the police when it comes to domestic violence because of this narrative that men are overwhelming the perpetrators?
Well, yeah, and that goes down to a lot of the training. I mean, I get a lot of police officers sending me messages describing exactly what you just said. I worked with did a podcast with a guy called Don Dutton, who's probably the greatest living expert in family violence. And he works at police, and he was expert witness in the prosecution of the OJ trial. He's done so many amazing things. He told me about a story in Canada about a man who called the police, and the police arrived. They found a knife sticking out of his belly, and they took him to hospital, had it removed, and then they still arrested him. So it's like, it doesn't matter. Like, literally, it couldn't be more obvious that she's stabbed him and he's still arrested. It's absurd. And then because police are biased because of the training, those stats then feed back into the conversation, and then the serpent eats its tail, and then the feminist researchers are like, well, look how many men are being arrested. That must be in. So it's like it's a self-perpetuating problem, and that's because, like I said, the training is done because of violence against women. We don't talk about domestic violence in this country. We only talk about violence against women. So if you're a man being abused, your friend, for example, I hate to tell you, but you, my friend, are a male victim of violence against women. You are considered by our government as a woman, because there is no strategy for violence against men. There is no such thing as violence against men. So you're basically called a woman. That is slowly changing. There's a bill right now that's likely going to fail, that is trying to bring in a strategy for male victims of abuse by the Tories without the government support. And it's probably going to fail because of the government. So yeah, it's pretty horrendous. I mean, I get loads of police officers messaging me with stories like that, and intense amount of guilt, where they know they're doing something to the man that's going to go onto his record, either an arrest or a warning. I heard one police officer say didn't do any of that. He just had to leave, no warning, no arrest, no nothing. And then, of course, abusive relationship. A few years later, they get divorced. They go into family court. The judge looks down. What's this? You got asked to leave by the police.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, no, but nothing happened. I just got told that, and it doesn't matter. That's enough. And it's not just the abuse they experience and how police are biased. It's the fact that the reporting then gets dragged up in often family court situations as a means of further abusing that man and depriving him of his children and more. So, yeah, and the interesting thing I read about it is it's the police officer most likely to not report a male victim of abuse is another male police officer.
Right.
So the setup that's least likely to get that report filed, 2 male police officers and a male victim, which is kind of interesting. I don't know if that lines up with your experiences. Was it male police officers who had this bias more than female police officers, or not?
Well, we're just talking about the training, George. Now I think about it and I think back to it, it was always a male abuser and a female victim. I don't think we ever did anything where it was a female abuser against a male victim. So even subconsciously, you're being primed to look at the male. And
you're not looking at the way in which women abuse men. You're not looking for those symptoms because they're not part of your training, because they are slightly different. But sorry, go on.
Yeah, just on that, like you said, like I know of stories, or I've heard stories where the male's been the victim, and when they've said, well, how come you stayed in the relationship so long? How come you never reported it sooner? Which obviously you shouldn't ask. But it was, well, if I was to leave the relationship, she'd make a false allegation of sexual assault against me, or I wouldn't see my kids again. So that then keeps you in the relationship. But when it comes to biases, it seemed pretty much across the board in relation to who would do the arresting, whether the male or female, because the officers were trained under this, like I said, statistical driven model to see people as statistics rather than human beings. But it was overwhelmingly the men that end up getting arrested when it could be either party, rather than de-escalation. And I remember saying to people like that's going to go on their record. And what if he is the partner being abused? Then they go to family court, and like you said, you've then got a domestic. Even if there's no further action taken, you've still got a PNC record for assault or for X, Y, and Z. They don't really look at the outcome. They just say, you've had 4 or 5 instances of this, so you've had X amount of call-outs to the house. Social services then get that data, so they can then present a narrative. And all this time, it could be, well, maybe the victim was the male after all. And just from my own anecdotal evidence, George, like I was in a DA relationship quite a few years back when I was a serving police officer, and I didn't even know I was going to cases, and I was listening to them talking to me about the abuse, even if it was a man reporting a woman. I was in my head going, that sounds very familiar. That sounds very familiar to what I'm currently going through, but I would have never reported it for whatever reason. And then the one time I did report it, my ex-partner made a counter allegation, and I was the one in handcuffs.
Yeah.
So it massively changed the way I view this entire situation.